called Latif Cherono. He is the general manager for operations and strategy at a company called Gearbox Europlacer. He's here with us in the studio. Good morning, Latif.
Good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Good to have you on the show. You know, everybody was asking this morning, so is this your son or is it your brother who's coming to the show?
We never met another one.
Yeah?
We've met another Eric.
Yeah.
We've met another Charles. Of course, we've never met another Ndu.
Really?
Well, not here at least. So, how are you feeling now, Latif?
Yeah. We tuko wengi. We are legion.
Well, now you're two. And then there were two.
There were two. Those who thought there was only one Latif in the no, there are two Latifs in the country.
Yeah.
They're not just Ati Abdul Latif, because many people are Abdul Latif, but now there's just Latif.
Yes.
And Latif.
Yes.
Yours is Latif.
Just Latif. Right.
Mine is Latif.
Okay.
And you said you have a sister called?
Latifa.
I have a daughter called Latifa.
Multiple connections on many levels.
So you work for a company called Gearbox Europe
Yeah.
Europlacer.
Gearbox Europlacer, correct.
What's Gearbox Europlacer? What do you do?
So we are really the first world-class electronics manufacturing services in the region. And what do I mean by that? It means that we design and manufacture electronics, right? In Kenya, that's normally known as a motherboard, but really the technical term for that is a printed circuit board, so a PCB. So if you open up this beautiful Galaxy tablet that you have or your watch, on the inside of that will be a circuit board that controls everything that devices do. And that in that little green board is really what is changing the world, right? Anything that we have in our lives, we're interacting with multiple electronic devices, you know, be it your phone, your watch, your car, your fridge, your microwave, multiple areas, right? So what we're trying to do is to say, how can we add value in the context of the continent, right? We're really not trying to say we want to reproduce what's happening across the world. We're saying, how do we innovate and solve the challenges that we have, leveraging electronics and technology to create a better outcome for, you know, the populace, and not only Kenya, but East Africa and going beyond into the continent.
So Gearbox is based in Kenya.
That is correct.
Is it Kenyan owned?
So let's take a step back and understand how Gearbox Europlacer came into being. So many of you may have heard of a company called Gearbox, which started in 2014 as an incubation space or maker space focused on hardware, right? So since late 2000s, there was a huge software revolution locally, right? And that came from the likes of NILAB and iHub. But when it came to the creation of hardware, there really wasn't a space to do that. You know, to create hardware, you need engineers, you need equipment to do that. So that's the foundation of Gearbox. And it actually came from a gap from the founder, Dr. Kamal Gashigi, who was at the University of Nairobi, and realized that if you want to create products, you need equipment. But you can't do that within the university framework just because it's not geared towards that. So that's when he left the university ecosystem and founded Gearbox. And since 2014, Gearbox has really been focused on helping anybody with an idea around hardware actualize that. So how do you go fabricate? So go from idea to proof of concept, so you can validate that in the market. Now the challenge comes in what's next after proof of concept, right? You need to scale. You need to go into a pilot. You need to go into mass manufacturing. That capacity did not exist in the region in terms of electronics. You had to, if you have a design, you have to ship that off to China to get manufactured and then get that shipped back. Now with that, there are issues. There's time and delay, you know, waiting for components. There are communication issues. But more importantly, if you didn't design it well and it gets manufactured in China, it comes back to you and you're starting that cycle over and over again. For a startup that is running on low cash, you know, going through that cycle twice means you run out of runway and you fold. Right. So many hardware companies actually switch to software just because the runway is much easier, but not because that there's a lack of innovation or a lack of a problem to be solved. Just meant that that ecosystem to support them did not exist. So Gearbox Europlacer is the company to solve or break that, fill that gap.
So what does that mean? If we're saying that we cannot essentially manufacture product because we do not have the equipment necessary to do so. You know, I just think of a program that we watch on TV every now and then, and looking at the different machines that then make some of these products. And it's really fascinating to see.
Right.
But we're saying now on the continent, we do not have that equipment. So are you saying now, with Gearbox and some of the innovations that are coming about, then that it is now possible to see the introduction of some of this equipment on the continent for some of these products? So it will then be possible in the near future, or even now, maybe it's already happening, that there will be manufacturing at that level on the continent because the equipment will now be made available?
So it's already happening. We're already doing this, right? We're already manufacturing these printed circuit boards, especially in the realm of IoT. So IoT really means the Internet of Things. How do you connect a device to the Internet to be able to leverage value or to gain value, right? I'll give you a good example here. We all have water problems in Nairobi, right? So which means that you need to store water. And you need to pump that water from an underground tank or an overhead tank into your home and use it, right?
Yep.
But what happens when your water levels run low, right? You have an issue. Or you don't have that visibility. If you're running a critical institution like a school or an apartment building and you run out of water, that's a huge disruption to your tenants or to your students. So having that data actually becomes value adding. And I'll give you an example. So there's a company called Mobi Water based here in Nairobi that has built an electronic device that measures water levels, sends that data to a dashboard so you can now see and gain insights on that, right? Now, this is where I'm talking about best fit solutions, right? If you are living in Beijing, you know, or somewhere where you have ready access to water, such a product would not come into your mind, right? But for the young engineers who are here and they're living these problems every day, they can come up with these solutions. And what we're trying to do is now fill in the gap to help them manufacture that. So for Mobi Water, we're now manufacturing their electronic devices that they can deploy locally, you know, and also reducing the product development time. They don't have to go to China, wait for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month to get their products done locally, right? So I'll keep throwing in little companies like that are actually solving
That are
this
actually
problem.
doing things.
Actually
okay.
doing things, yeah.
So back to that question. So Gearbox Europlacer is Kenyan owned.
Gearbox Europlacer is a joint venture.
Okay.
So we have a Kenyan, so it's a tripatriate joint venture. So we have a Kenyan partner, we have a UK technology partner, hence the name Europlacer.
Okay.
So Europlacer is an equipment manufacturer that makes the equipment that makes electronics, right? There are only about 7 of these companies in the world. Europlacer is one of them. So they were looking to get into the market and were looking for a good partner, and they found Gearbox, and we were also looking at the same thing. So it was, you could say, a match made in heaven. And then our last partner is an impact investment firm out of London called Wellers Impact, which does a lot of impact investing in East Central and Southern Africa. Yeah.
Okay, Latif. So to the conversation of the day.
Yes. to the
4
conference.
days ago, President William Ruto goes to the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and he's talking to the business people there, and he says, you know what, this is all we're doing. We are working with our telcos so that we can have a smartphone that will go for less than 5,000 Kenya shillings. Let me promise the country that in the next 8 to 12 months, we'll have the cheapest smartphone in Africa made here in Kenya. And Latif Cherono at Latif Cherono went onto Twitter on the same day and says, let's break down what it takes to have the cheapest smartphone in Africa made in Kenya. Made in Kenya really means this is what I do for a living. And he started telling us.
Yep.
There are 4 key components to make this work: the IP of smartphone design, component supply, certified manufacturing facility, trained personnel. You say you'll address this, and you basically went on a thread on Twitter.
Okay.
Breaking it down. Now, here is the platform. It's a bigger platform. Use this platform, break it down.
Let's break it down.
Let's start from the very basics.
All right.
The president says, working with telcos, in 8 to 12 months, we can have Africa's cheapest mobile smartphone in the market.
In the market.
Is it possible? Is it not? Just from hearing that.
Just from hearing that.
Yeah.
So the first caveat I'll say, I don't know what they are doing, what's in place, but I'll break it down. If Nothing has been done from this point. Is it possible within 12 months? The first thing you have to say is you have to define what is possible. When you say made in Kenya, what do you really mean, right? So in electronics, if you're making a smartphone, a tablet, you need the design for that particular product. To come up with a design for an electronic device, you're talking years. It takes a while to
design for the handset.
the design for the handset,
Okay.
right? So if you
years to design a handset.
it does. So, for example, why I'm saying it takes years. Anybody who's taking building a handset, you're actually building it on top of other technologies that have been done. So that technology stack, right?
Okay.
So that takes time. So I'll go back to the Samsung Galaxy Tab here. The reason why it's so sleek and refined is because it has been developed over a long time, right? And being refined. Because we don't have that capacity to say we have designed a Kenyan smartphone, then we say, where can we get that design? So you will get that design from a sector in the electronics industry that's called an ODM. And this means an original device or design manufacturer. So these are companies that design products, white label them, which means they sell them without any labels, and you can purchase them, add your branding to it, and call it your own. So the first distinction there, when you're saying made in Kenya, this is a Kenyan product, is it really a Kenyan product?
Are you designing it locally or are you buying from
Exactly,
somebody?
right? So just understanding that, let's be transparent here. So securing that IP has to be done, right? Now, if I was to look at the phones from the telcos in the market, there's several of those branded with telco branding on it. So that tells me this is a product from an ODM, right? So that licensing of that product has been secured, all right? Maybe it's been secured from the distribution side, but not secured from the manufacturing side. So that work also needs to be done.
Okay.
So that you have to do that. So the next step is to say, if we're going to make this phone, this white label device that we have secured, what are the components required to make that device? So you will need, very basic, you will need a display. You'll need plastic, you'll need a chipset, which is the controller that controls everything, the CPU, right? You'll need a battery. So all these components multiplied by how many you want to sell over 2 years, you have to secure that supply chain. And why is this important? The supply chain right now for electronics is extremely volatile, right? Due to many factors. I think many of you may be aware of the Ukraine war, COVID, and the like. So actually saying that I can get access to 1 million chips is not a trivial thing, right? To the point to that you have to book that order to say, I will buy these 1 million chips today to secure that. Otherwise, somebody else will come and buy that and buy it from me, right? So there's that part. So you have to secure that. Then it actually now comes to the part of manufacturing. So when you're manufacturing, you need to say, what are you manufacturing? Right? Are you manufacturing the whole device? So when you're saying manufacturing the whole device, are you doing the casing? Are you doing the screen? Are you doing the PCB, the motherboard? And then are you assembling it?
The
battery, all that, right? What are you going to do? To do all of that requires a long time to build that capability, right? Companies that do that are called vertically integrated companies. So Samsung will get a lot of mileage today. Samsung does their displays, they do their casing, they do pretty much everything, right? So they can say this is our device. Most companies in the world will source different components from suppliers,
And then
right?
assemble.
And then assemble and then add their value in specific areas, right?
Okay.
So if we're saying in Kenya we're making a phone, smartphone, what are we going to do? We're not going to do the casing, not just yet, right? Because that capacity for injection molding for phone cases is not there. We have the foundation, but we're not there from a mold making perspective. Maybe in 2 years we'll be there. The screen, very few companies in the world make the screen for phones and tablets. So you're going to purchase that screen from that supplier. So where we can actually start adding value is the motherboard.
Okay.
So can we do that manufacturing here? That manufacturing has never been done locally until Gearbox Europlacer is doing it. Actually, there's
what's Dead and Kimathi doing?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Just put a pin in that, and we'll get to that. So if you're saying you're doing the PCB, right? So that's something known in the industry as surface mount technology. And that just means you're placing the different electronic components on top of the board, right? And it's all done by machines. You have to set up the facility to encapsulate that process because it's a highly controlled process to the point of you have to control the temperature, the humidity, the dust levels, the electrostatic dissipation in that facility, because all these things affect the quality of your product.
Okay.
Right? That takes time to do that, right? So to set up that facility in 6 months, it's a little close. But I mean, if you throw enough money at a problem, you can reduce the yeah, you can solve it, right?
Long and short of it,
Yeah.
Latif, is you're saying 8 to 12 months, possible but improbable.
Possible but improbable. But again, we don't have visibility on what has been done, what has not been done. I can't say that for sure. But if they're starting from ground zero, it's improbable, right? But so how do you solve that, right? So now I'll say this with a plug for what we do. We have the capacity to do this, right? And you don't go in building phones from 0 to 1 million in a year. That you can't do that because you will end up with half of that being scrap because you haven't refined and defined your manufacturing processes. You have to scale gradually. So if you want to build motherboards or PCBs, I'll say come to Gearbox Europlacer. We'll do that for you. But really, the more important thing here is to say, you say you want to make the cheapest smartphone, right? So what is the cheapest smartphone? Let's say that is 5,000 shillings or $50 for ease of conversion, right? When you're talking electronics, it's always on the dollar rate. So $50 is your selling price for the phone. We know right now that taxes on phones are close to 40%. You've got your VAT, you've got your import taxes, you've got taxes at the port. All these add up to 41%. So to hit that rate, at some point you have to remove those taxes,
Yeah.
right? Now, the benefit of removing the taxes, if you're doing local manufacturing, is that you are supporting a local industry with a long-term vision. Now, will that happen for the ecosystem, anybody doing electronics, or will that happen just on one particular event or one particular vendor? I hope it's the former, that it happens for the entire ecosystem.
I have to ask this question.
Yes,
When you
sir.
talk about the cost, say, of a phone, what is it that determines the cost of a phone? What is it that makes one phone 10,000, another one 20,000? What are you costing? What is in the phone that makes it what we are told it is?
Okay. So, to break it down in 5 simple steps. So you have the design or the IP of the phone. How much time was spent to create that device, right? People with huge R&D or companies with huge R&D budgets, the Samsungs, the Apples of this world, spend a gargantuan amount of money in developing their products. That is costed in the final product that you buy, right? Then next you will go into the actual components of the device, right? So a powerful device like the top of the range Samsung or an Apple, the chipset on that device, the processing on that device, you're looking at a cost of $120 just for that chip. Whereas on a very basic $50 phone, that chip might be $7 or $8. The next cost will be your screen. So the bigger the screen, the more pixel resolution it has, the more vibrant it is, the higher the cost. And then there's the manufacturing cost. Now, ironically, when you look at the electronics value chain, manufacturing is actually the tiniest sliver of value add in that chain. In commercial products, laptops, phones, the manufacturing portion is actually 8% or less of the total value. Whereas the value, it's upstream in the design and downstream in the distribution of that product. And why do I say this? You can just look at Apple. Apple doesn't manufacture any of its products, but they are the most capitalized tech company in the world, right? So if we're saying we want to make the phone in Kenya, and we want to manufacture the phone, and we're only focusing on manufacturing and nothing upstream on design, then we're losing. And we're losing bigly, if I can use that word. Right?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, we really are. So how do we then build the capacity to handle upstream
Upstream and then downstream.
and downstream?
Downstream, we have the telcos.
Yes.
Maybe they could, work with the distribution
Exactly.
network that's already in the
Right.
country. Blah, blah.
Right.
So it's upstream,
Upstream.
where it's the design and the components that we're talking about.
Exactly. Right. Now you asked what's happening in Nyeri. So Nyeri, I've been to Nyeri twice.
At the Dedan Kimathi
At Dedan
University.
Kimathi, right? A company called STL, Semiconductor Technologies.
Yep.
This is an amazing facility, right? I've had the fortunate to be across the world to see electronics being made, and to see what they're doing in Nyeri is mind blowing. I mean, my last visit there, I was there with the CEO of Raspberry Pi, and he was mind blown, right? So they are actually on the path to start making components, start doing semiconductor fabrication locally. They're on that path.
Why is it mind blowing?
It's mind blowing because it's happening here, right? No, and let me state that when you're looking at, especially the semiconductor world, these are technologies that are happening in very few places across the world, right? Taiwan, for example, with the largest semiconductor fabrication facility in the world, Taiwan SMC. Then Intel and the like, right? And these environments are highly controlled because any sort of impurities in that manufacturing environment can cause significant damage to the process
And the product.
and the product.
Yes.
But it's happening here. And for it to happen here and understand the process that they have gone through to build capacity is mind-blowing, right? Their workforce is all, apart from the CEO and two of the staff maybe, all under 30. Gender is 60%
60% what?
to the female,
All right.
right? All engineers, right? So that to me it's mind-blowing. And that tells me that if we focus on building capacity, then essentially you've created the pathway to the future, right?
Okay, let's
So-
take a break.
Yeah.
It's 9:30. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. We're having a conversation with Latif Cherono, who is the General Manager, Ops and Strategy at Gearbox Europlacer. We are talking about the President's promise that in 8 to 12 months' time, it's possible for Kenya to manufacture Africa's cheapest smartphone at 5,000, less than 5,000 shillings in the market. Is it possible? Is it probable? What would be required to get there? How much effort needs to be put in place? Can we get the sense that this much effort is actually being put in place in government circles and in the industry? That's what we're asking ourselves.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
With Latif Cherono, General Manager in charge of operations and strategy at Gearbox Europlacer, talking about the President's promise for Africa's cheapest smartphone coming from Kenya. He said, let me promise the country that in the next 8 to 12 months, we'll have the cheapest smartphone in Africa made here in Kenya. Now, Latif, made here in Kenya, what did he mean? Could have been assembled here in Kenya.
Well, again, you have to always define that.
Not necessarily, everything designed and built here,
Right,
just
right.
assembly.
Assembly. So
If everything is just being assembled here, is it possible for us to actually have an assembly plant and assemble mobile phones from here?
So if it's just assembly, yes, it's possible. We can do what we did with the DLP, the Digital Literacy Program, where we assemble laptops. Right? And it happened. Happened at Moi, happened at Jaquad.
Okay.
But
Just pause.
yes,
When we assemble these laptops, it means that we got a manufacturer who brought us the parts that met the specifications that we needed. And ostensibly, it was supposed to be cheaper. Ostensibly.
okay.
Okay? But they were then our computers. Because we assembled them here.
Right.
The question I'm asking, the same thing that Eric is asking. There is always this talk of this is an X product that is, they actually say made in such and such a place. The good thing is they don't say manufactured. When we're off air, I gave the example of a vehicle that is called a Kenyan car. manufactured here. It's called Mobius. Okay. I'd like to understand what makes that car a Kenyan car.
Okay. So, what both of you are really asking is the path to value add manufacturing, right? So, when you're on this path, you always start with basic assembly, right? You take what is known in the industry as a semi-knockdown kit. Things come together and you put them together, right?
That's it.
But the amount of value that you're adding is very little. You're not adding any IP to that. You're just snapping things together, low skill labor. The next path in that is where you actually start adding IP and more skilled labor into that process. So doing more complicated things like the electronics, designing portions, maybe on a vehicle, it might be the lights. On a laptop, it might be maybe somebody does a Wi-Fi card or something like that. And the way you want to get to is fully integrated manufacturing, where you're doing the majority of that product locally. Why do you want to go down on this path? Because the more value you add to a product, the better off your economy is, right? I gave the example of what we were doing with the DLP project with very basic assembly was less than 2% value add to the total product, right? And the project was touted to be earning a lot of revenue. But where was the rest of the 98% of that revenue going? Outside the country, right? So if you're going on this path, you have to be deliberate and intentional to say that we're building capability for the future. You asked the question on why should we build these things, right? Why? The reason is because that's where the future is. And the people who create or own the IP in technology are the ones who will benefit. You've all heard about the fourth industrial revolution coming, right? But when you look at the patents in the fourth industrial revolution, the technologies around that, those patents are within 9 countries around the world. When you look at Africa, Africa doesn't create any patents, and not only that, is not even considered in the conversation as a consumer in the fourth industrial revolution.
Wow.
But we know this is transformative, right? I'll give you another example on how what we've known as IoT can change lives or impact lives. So there are companies in the LPG sector. I'll give you some examples. You've got MGas, Cocoa Networks, Pago Energy. What these companies do is they provide access to liquid propane cylinder in a pay-as-you-go format. And they do that using electronics. So you and I, we all get liquid propane, LPG gas in our homes, but we have to pay 3,000 shillings to get that cylinder. But ironically, that form of energy in that cylinder is cheaper than charcoal, right? But somebody who's earning small amounts of money a day can't afford that huge outlay. But if you can give them a cylinder with an IoT device on top of that cylinder, and they can buy gas to cook their meal, so I pay 10 shillings, that device gives me 10 shillings worth of gas, or 5 shillings worth of gas, which is enough to cook a meal, then the benefit is transformative, right?
Yeah.
Those types of products, and what I'm talking about, innovation, we really like to say best fit solutions designed locally that solve African problems. That's what we're trying to do.
If we were to get into this fully integrated manufacturing processes,
Yes, sir.
would we not need to have the human resource that enables us to do this?
Absolutely.
So the question is, do we?
Do we? So, yes and no.
Okay.
What we have right now is the foundation for that human resource, right? I really believe Kenya is on the verge of what I call a hardware revolution, right? We went through a software revolution right around M-Pesa was created. So why do I say a hardware revolution? Because we have the right things happening at the right time. We have this huge pool of young engineers who have capacity from a theoretical standpoint, but they don't have the capacity from a practical standpoint, but that can be trained over time if you're intentional. We also have, we're really more of a tech-focused and innovation-focused economy or startup in the country. So that's a plus. You don't see that elsewhere or many places on the continent, right? So if you have young engineers who are ready to be trained, a mentality to try to solve problems in entrepreneurship, then what can be done to catalyze that? The whole point of that thread was to say this is a good idea, but this cannot be an event. It cannot be we're making smartphones and that's where it ends. It cannot be what we did to the DLP. All these facilities that I mentioned, Moi, JQuat, are dead, dormant. They're not doing anything.
So they just did those laptops.
Exactly.
And that's it.
And that's it.
They're no longer doing the laptops.
Nothing's
And even
happening.
after doing the laptops, when
Yes.
they're brought to the market, much of that money went outside the country to the
Yes.
owners,
Pres-
the
of the
real
IP.
owners of the IP.
Correct.
Of the laptops.
Yes. So if we're going to say we're going to do a cheap smartphone, then we need to say this is a catalyst for this roadmap.
Okay.
And what does this roadmap look like? This roadmap is the same roadmap that India has followed. India has a policy called the National Policy of Electronics that they put in place to build up
National Policy of Electronics.
National Policy of Electronics, instituted in 2012, and the second version has come out in 2019. Instituted in 2012, by 2016 they had doubled their output in electronics. They went from $2 billion to $4 billion, right? Egypt has a policy called Egypt Makes Electronics. Again, focused purely on that entire value chain. In 2000, Egypt's output in electronics was $60 million. Currently, their output is $4 billion,
No.
right? All because the focus has been, this is the policy, the long-term policy, to say incentives for catalyzing this are reduced.
Yeah.
Training is put into place. R&D, if you're doing R&D in locally, no taxes or reduced or subsidized.
Right.
You're doing that for the future, right? To put yourself in a space where you have long-term growth. We're always searching to say, where can Kenya go to be a growth positive? Where's growth positive can be? This is that sector, but it has to be intentional, and it cannot be just one event like the smartphone. So really, that was my thread.
Sure. So now, if you look at what you've said and if you connect it to, 50, 60 years ago when the initial industrial revolution took place,
Yep.
it was essentially to get these nations who had come off of the Second World War after the Great Depression and said, look, you know what? We cannot continue in this manual way of, in order for us to survive, we must produce.
Yes.
And so the wealth that a lot of those nations still survive on today came as a result of what they did during this revolution. And is that not what we are saying? That essentially you thrive in the future on the surplus of your initial investment that is domestic, that is local. So what I hear you saying then essentially is that, yeah, we can have these great innovations, but it must be deliberate onto something else. It can't just be one-time flash in the pan kind of thing, and Kenya has this great smartphone, but we're saying that in order to survive, really, now we're talking about in order to survive, first of all, and then go to the place where you compete on a global level,
Yep.
is that you must make your own.
You must build that capacity. And this opportunity, there's a huge opportunity here, but this opportunity is time bound, right? And it's time bound in two ways. Kenya is ahead in this space on the continent. If you exclude South Africa, and if you exclude Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, we're ahead. But we're not going to be ahead for long if we're not intentional about how do we stay ahead. We're also time bound because of automation. Automation is coming, whether we like it or not. And what automation does, it removes the need for human labor in a point where you say human labor is my key resource, right? What happens when you have an automated factory that only requires 10% of labor that required, 10 years ago, and you have a huge young workforce? It's irrelevant to what you can add to that conversation.
Yep.
So you have to do this now to prepare for that future, because it's coming whether we like it or not. So
There's in 1994 something called the Nyayo Motor Corporation that was set up. It's now referred to as the National Machinery Complex Limited. Now, the idea behind it and what it morphed into being was something that is actually, well, it's not widely known, but it's actually fascinating. At least for me, it is very, very fascinating. Would such a complex help spearhead this idea we have, where we can get to a point where when you talk of manufacturing and talking about parts that are required for that process to work,
right.
If the vision was realized, would such an organization, would such a complex be part of that whole that we speak of, that would now get us to that point where we're talking about a fully integrated manufacturing system?
Absolutely. But it has to be an ecosystem play. Where I think the gap fell with NMC early in the day was that it was just one organization. You can't make change when you're just one. But when you're many and you're all connected in a cluster, then you can make the change, right? In electronics, all the minerals for these electronics, most of them come from our region, right?
Yep.
The cobalt in batteries and the like. But we're not adding that value, right? We're mining it, and then it gets shipped somewhere else and gets manufactured and gets shipped back to us as a final product. So if you're building this national policy, you need to say, where do we add value? Okay, you need to build capacity in innovation, right? You need to have capacity in the manufacturing of the components. Translating something such as tantalum, which is used in capacitors in such devices, to process that so now it can be made into a component that can be sold across the world, right? That is a type of vision that I'm really hoping was what was condensed into one sentence. And that's my vision and my hope.
What would it take for us to actually get the realization? So if you look at what the president has done, he's set up a ministry, not just for information,
right,
but for digital economy.
Right.
Do you think with that State Department for Digital Economy, then all these things that you're talking about, taking that giant leap towards becoming an electronics giant in the region, is actually realizable through this?
It is, because it's been done. It's been done in India, it's been done in Egypt, it's been done in Malaysia, it's been done in Vietnam.
But then you're in this sector.
Yeah. So
are you hearing this? There's a creation of a ministry. There's creation of a State Department.
Right.
There's an ICT authority.
Right.
There's a Concert Technopolis authority. There are all these things.
Right.
But are you hearing the right things, the right words coming out of government?
let me put it this way, we've not heard it yet. But that's not to mean that we won't hear it. So it's my hope that this conversation is enlightening and opens
What do we
up.
need to start hearing that?
So it really needs to be a stakeholder discussion, right? And it's to say, take everybody in this ecosystem. What do you need? What are your barriers, right? What are your pain points? Where do we want to go? How do we solve that? And what's the roadmap, right? So in electronics manufacturing, the barriers for us are, and it will be the barriers for the smartphone that will be manufactured, are taxes, right? And we're taxing heavily upfront and not realizing the benefits downstream are tenfold, hundredfold, right? So how do we look at that conversation and change how we're approaching that regimen?
So when I'm asking what we need,
Yep.
then we need the right voices
Absolutely.
in a room.
Yep.
But
Do we have the right voices in the room right now?
I think we're still looking for the room.
But let me ask this
wow,
question.
okay.
I think we've had opportunities to even have the room. The German government wanted to build a technical university. Wanted to be, from the ground up, build, equip the works.
Yes.
Now, something didn't quite happen the way it should. We don't have that university. Now, in terms of capacity, the room we're speaking of, that would have provided us with something that this entire region doesn't actually have.
Right.
So, when we talk about people thinking about it,
Yeah.
if they were willing, the question I keep asking, so why was it not built? Why has it not been built? What did our people do? Because our people did something.
Because you don't have the right voices
Don't have the
in
right
the
voices,
room.
right? And it's another thing when you're talking about the right voices. So
Or the right brains.
or the right brains, right? I'm a product of somebody who was born in Kenya, had the fortune to go outside and learn and come back and add value. There are hundreds of other Kenyans like me out there, right? I can look at my phone right now and I know there's a Kenyan who's doing AI for smart cars in San Francisco. There's a Kenyan who's up in Intel, like very high up.
Yep.
There's a Tanzanian, actually one of my best friends, is a Tanzanian, but he's a VP at Amazon. All of my peers at my age are looking to see how do we add value on this continent. But to do that, the right incentives and the right environment needs to be here to allow that. I mentioned the Taiwan semiconductor factory.
Yeah.
That came from this precise problem. The person who founded that foundry was born in Taiwan, worked in the US in Silicon Valley, but realized that to grow, he can actually add more value back home. But the Taiwanese government said, okay, what do you need to do that? And enabled that environment. And now they literally own the chipset manufacturing facility in the world. So much so it's a natural security issue for many countries that one country does that, right? So when you're saying what can we do, that is where the conversation starts. How do you bring the knowledge that's outside, bring it in, right? How do you create the conducive environment for companies that want to manufacture in Kenya or in Africa to do that, right? There are companies who are manufacturing medical products best fit for Africa, but they're manufacturing it in China, right? But they want to do it in Africa, but there's no capacity. So how do we leverage that? That's where the conversation needs to start.
So it's a bigger conversation. So then I hear you saying, and being careful not to say it at the same time, that when now we hear proclamations like this, the hope is that the back end work is either done, or at least the conversation is happening for it to be done. It cannot just be something we say and then go figure it out later. Kind of like what you say, well, I'm going to be in the interview room, I'm going to say I can do the job, and then I'm going to go and learn later. It cannot be something like that.
You're right. It cannot be, and it has to be. It has to be intentional. It has to be. Why I'm passionate about this is because it's time bound. Like if we don't think we've done this multiple times and we keep failing to actualize that vision. You mentioned NMC. That was the vision, right? Create that capacity to get to the point where you're integrated manufacturing on cars. But at this point, we're still doing semi-knockdown kits, right? On the positive side, I will say that when it comes to electronic motorbike fabrication, some of those parts are now being done in Kenya, which is great, right? But we need to do more of that. So with this proclamation, I really hope it's more than just a smartphone. It's the start of something transformative.
Well, at least there's another conversation that's taking place. That, as he said, we are talking to telcos. He wasn't saying you should not start talking to telcos. Right. It's actually, we are talking to telcos. Right. That when he says in 8 to 12 months' time, at least somebody has come and told him, we are starting and maybe it's possible. Within, not that he just thought spur of the moment, why can't we do these phones?
Right.
Because there are very many promises of 8 to 12 months that he made on that day. Right. And that's why you start asking yourself, was the 12 months just a thing that the president was doing? Was this his day? Was it his day for 12 months? Right. He promised 12 months mobile phone, 12 months, what else are we going to happen in 12 months? Food security, 12 months.
Eric, I get the impression that
dams, 12 months.
That some thought has gone into this, and that there are people, whether you want to call them think tanks or whatever, but there are people who've done a little of this homework, and there's an idea that is now, we're being told about it, but the thinking behind it.
Just hope so. Because if they haven't talked to the only company that is making PCBs in Kenya,
so they're going there.
If they haven't talked to them,
so you talk to telcos, then you
and
come
you want to say,
and you want to talk about
then
manufacturing.
You cannot talk about 8 to 12 months.
If they're the think tanks are thinking, they need to be incorporating such people in the thinking.
They do. But they're talking to the telcos first. Surely, were we not told? They were talking to the telcos first. These guys will come in later.
City, thank you. Thank you very much, Latif, for joining us.
Thank you.
Latif Cherono is the General Manager for Operations and Strategy at Gearbox Europlacer. They are the only company in this region that are manufacturing circuit boards, motherboards for electronic devices and selling them, of course, not locally,